town in north central Iowa called Buffalo Center. It's in Winnebago County.
Oh, well.
It has one claim to fame historically. It is the first consolidated school, it was the first consolidated school west of the Mississippi River in 1897.
Really?
So you're talking about rural schools and consolidation. I was a part of that. I went to that school. My sister, who was 10 years older than I was, took normal training in high school.
Yep.
She was 17 when she graduated and got her first job as a teacher of a one-room school.
Jeez.
In a township school south of our little town. And I was 10 years younger, obviously about 7 or 8 years old, maybe 9, when she had a couple years in there. She would get on, since it was consolidated, she would get on a school bus with wooden sides, and they would take her out to that school because they were going to pick up kids going to high school in that farm area. When we didn't have school, I would ride out with her to that school to spend the day. I didn't attend the school, I wasn't a student there, but I was there for probably several different occasions, just having fun with the day and going to recess and things like that. So she then went on, came to UNI and got her teaching degree, and just passed a couple of years ago. But I wanted to say about those two things, I've got that connection personally. So,
Hope you're.
all right. So now we're going. So I just wanted to set that straight. That those are my connection with rural schools in Iowa and consolidated schools.
So if you taught in Lorenz, does the last name Northbury or Zappa ring a bell with you at all?
North.
North, yeah.
Yeah.
They're my in-laws. My wife is from Lorenz.
What's her maiden name?
North. Been Lyle, Lucy, Zappa was who we married, but Lyle North.
Okay. So I left there in '64. So I started teaching there in 1958, and I remember names because there were only 40 in the class.
Right.
I'm trying to recall that name now.
Okay, I'm just curious.
So she's from. So your wife is from
Lorenz, and her whole family's from that area.
What year did she graduate?
She was 80s. No, she graduated much later than 90s. Her parents would have been. See, her parents would have graduated in 68, but her aunts and uncles would have been 63, 64, somewhere in that realm.
And they were north, south.
They were north as well.
Okay.
So right in that realm when you would have
Sure.
retired.
So when I moved, '64, I
moved, sorry.
So I would have had classes with juniors and seniors.
Might have been a little young then.
So
okay.
they were a little bit younger, and they definitely could have been there.
I'm just curious. You don't meet many people from Lorenz, so when I see
Exactly.
that, I'm like,
And our claim to fame there, I was also a basketball coach. I taught history, I was a basketball coach. And we went to the state tournament 2 years in a row. It was a Hoosiers type story. In 1962, there was only one class of basketball. Now there are 4 in boys, and there are 5 in girls. So there was only one class. And there were 8 teams that got to go to that state tournament, and we were one of them.
that's cool.
I had kids who had not been out of Pocahontas County, and it was at Iowa State at the University Fieldhouse. So we did a convoy like Hoosiers.
Yep.
You ever see the movie?
I have.
Yeah, and that's what we were.
That's
this
awesome.
is before the movie was made. No, Hoosiers were Bobby Plummer in 1953, and the rest of the story is Butler Fieldhouse, which is still going, by the way.
Is it really?
Oh yeah, that Butler is big and it's cavernous. And I'm a basketball nut.
Okay.
I still play over here at noon every day. I told Laura I go to B-Sticker and I park here and I play in what we call the UNI-NBA, Union Basketball Association.
I didn't know there was one.
Yeah, it's at the Wellness Center and the gym's down below.
Yeah.
And so I have to break in new students every semester, and they've got to learn how to pass me the ball so I can shoot.
So do you still know how to play 6-on-6?
I never coached girls basketball, and they were very good at 6-on-6 out there at that time. Now I was director of secondary education at Cedar Falls Schools, and of course it was a board position, so I was at every board meeting and making reports and things like that. We only had one controversial meeting in as long as I was principal and everything, about 40 years of service. It was over 6-on-6 and 5-on-5. Can you believe it?
You know what, Iowa doesn't surprise me, actually.
We were 6-on-6, and the move was to go 5-on-5, especially at larger schools, because girls were going to play college ball, and if they played a guard, they never shot the ball or anything. So we had one one parent, the girl's name was Cameron Rollinger, and her father was Russ Rollinger. He had a hamburger shop down on University Avenue called Rollinger's, which was a famous place, closed. He was so upset that I had my athletic council do the study and research, and I made the presentation to the board that we needed to go to 5-5.
Okay.
He showed up. We had a sign on the wall, which is still there, Cedar Falls Community Schools, a tradition of excellence. Mm-hmm. That's our motto. And I got this. Russ came in, as a friend of mine. He came in and he said, after they made the vote, he said, and he pleaded with the board, don't do it. And he looked at that sign and said, a tradition of excellence, my ass. And he left the building. and there were a couple of board members I didn't convince, and it was, we always had unanimous votes, it was 5-2.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So anyway, I'm boring you with a lot of detail. Laura, let's go. What do you got going?
Well, this is interesting though.
Okay. I play with Levi.
I'm done, I promise.
Yeah, Levi says you're the sharpest guy he knows. So.
Levi was a classmate and friend of one of my grandsons in high school. So he's really quite a guy, Levi. I enjoy him around here. Oh, I have one more thing, Nathan. Before you go too, you talked about museums.
Yeah.
Do you know Jim King at all?
Oh, I know him quite well.
All right. I just finished being a reader of one of his books for the publisher.
Okay.
And I wrote a sleep jacket.
Okay.
It's called Golden Rule Schools. It's Kansas. His home area is Kansas. He grew up in rural western Kansas.
Okay.
And he went to every school district, every county in Kansas, knew which schools had closed. These were really rural schools.
Wow.
And he's got research for everyone. So there's a chapter, there are 4 counties in Kansas, and 105 counties, and he did 109 because he did 4 counties with 2.
Okay.
I thought they were so good. So I read every chapter, and it was fantastic.
I'll have to talk to him. He didn't tell me he was doing that.
And he's now doing one for Iowa.
Jim is?
Jim is. He's written, his first book was on his bad practice.
Yeah, that's the one I'm familiar with.
Yeah, and you read that. And this Metal Art book is the one he's doing. I spent several hours with him. I got a state map, and since I know a lot about Iowa schools, I've done a lot of school evaluations over the years, I selected schools that I knew that were closed. The high school was closed.
Okay.
Lorenz was one of them.
I kind of wondered.
Yeah. So he emailed me. He was up in Alaska. He does the vet work for the Iditarod.
Yeah.
He goes up there every year. What a fantastic guy.
Jim's fascinating
He's
too.
a retired veterinarian. He's not quasi-retired, but a fascinating guy. And his book, Golden Rule Days, that was the one. And he's going to do, he's working right now. In fact, he had a phone call with Bob and Connie Dallenbaugh from Lorenz.
Okay.
And he's going to go out there and meet with them in June. He goes out and meets with these people.
So he gets the first-hand
He
experience.
gets a first-hand experience.
That's the way
So
to do it.
anyway, I thought I'd bring that in and just kind of remind you of that. Jim was also, at that time, when I was on the Museum Advisory Board, he was chair of that. He's also been chair of the Historical Society Board.
And that's where I met him at Rotary.
Yep,
And
yep.
then then he was on the board with me at the Cedar Falls Historical
Right,
Society. So
right.
we've met that way, and I like him a lot. He's never shared that with me. I knew his.
Yeah, he's a humble guy. He would not blow his own horn under any circumstance, but just fantastic.
Know who I'm talking to next time I see him.
Yep, right. And I know most of your Rotarians. I've spoken to the Rotarians over the years many times.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, so you do know us. I didn't wear my pin today.
Yeah, okay. So if you want John Coleman's name, I've got it. The guy who was the
Please.
trustee, and he's a great guy. And,
Please, if you want to grab that after the interview.
Yeah.
And I'll just, if you want to write that info
Yeah.
right there.
So what's your process here? What's your procedure?
So this is just going to be a very casual
Informal?
conversation.
And if I digress, you can clip me out later on.
You know, you are more than welcome to. We're going to be doing editing at the end anyway,
Sure,
so
sure, yeah.
you know,
Okay.
it's literally just
Yeah,
anything you
I
remember.
want to give you
you know.
that background so that you could, I'm not just talking out of thin air. I know,
Oh, no.
I know some things, and I know I have some
You know a lot of
experiences there.
things.
I'm excited to hear
But I
this
was
one.
never a student in this wonderful school. But I this building is just unbelievable.
You had a different experience though, you were in one-room schools, but not as a student, but just as a kid with his sister.
Just a kid with my sister.
That's the first I've ever seen that, so that's really cool.
When you think about it, normal training, of course, what was this school original name?
Teacher's
Pilot
College.
School, Bible Normal School. That was for teacher training. 1876 was the first year of this school. What was that? It was a centennial year of the United States. And then fast forward to 100 years later, it was 1976. And we did several projects celebrating the bicentennial of the country as a school district. And a group of teachers got the idea of getting a one-room school, moved in, and they worked with the Historical Society and got Bennington Township number 9, which is now the one-room school right here.
The Little Red
Teachers.
Schoolhouse.
It's the Little Red Schoolhouse. And that was a project that came from, well, everything is kind of connected there, but that's the third one that I have with that one. I was chair of the Historical Society board when this was going on there. And then we had a lot of issues with maintaining and the roofing, and you still got that. Okay.
I get that.
Yeah, right.
All right, Floyd. Well, it's the 9th today, right? Yes, today is April 9th, and we're at the Marshall Smart School on UNI campus. My name is Laura Carpenter with the UNI Museum, and I'll be interviewing Floyd Winter. Thank you, Floyd, for interviewing with us. Please state your name, your job title in school, and what years you taught and administered in school.
My name is Floyd Winter. I currently live in Cedar Falls, and I've lived here for nearly 50 years. I did begin my teaching career in 1958 at the town of Lorenz School District in northwest Iowa. It's in Pocahontas County, and we'll get into that later on. Marshall Township School, Center School was a very important part of our district. And then I moved from that community after 6 years of teaching history I moved on to Vinton, Iowa, and I taught there, and then I became principal in Vinton in 1968 of Washington High School at Vinton. The reason that it was named Washington High School, Vinton, is that Lars didn't have 2 high schools. It did have 2 high schools because the Iowa Braille and Sight Saving School was there. And it was actually a pre-K, that time unheard of, through high school student body throughout the state. And it was a residential school. And if you've ever been by on Old Highway 218, the Braille School still stands. Braille School services still exist, but they're now mainstream back into the community. So people will go out to the students who formerly taught at that school. We had students who came to us from Braille School just a few blocks away, and they were in our chemistry classes and things like that. So then I moved here in 1973. I was principal of Cedar Falls High School for 5 years, and I was director of secondary education at Cedar Falls Community School District. For the next several years, I retired in 1999 from that position. And since then, I've been doing a lot of volunteer work in Cedar Falls and the Cedar Valley and the state.
Wow. Let's start with your experiences of going to rural school with your sister. That's quite unique.
All right. I grew up in a small town in Winnebago County in north central Iowa, right on the Minnesota border, a community of Buffalo Center. Every community or small community has some kind of connection, or their set of 15 minutes of fame, at least 15 words of fame. And the Buffalo Center was no different, and it's still on their website today. It's now North Iowa Community School District. It's Buffalo Center and small communities surrounding it. There are probably about 6 communities that send students to that school. Smaller now than it was when Buffalo Center was alone 50 years ago because of population decline. And that school became the first consolidated school district west of the Mississippi in 1897. And what that means is that they became the center of that portion of the 2 townships up in Winnebago County, that all the one-room schools were still in existence in 1897, lots of them, thousands in Iowa, and that was no different, but those students would go to school at Buffalo Center, and they actually had transportation to go out and get those students who were leaving the one-room schools going on to high school. And so they were all part of that district. That's what consolidation was all about. Now, the Iowa legislature in probably the early 1950s decided that we want to have the school districts become community school districts. The Cedar Falls Community School District, the Waterloo Community School District, the Lorenz Community School District. There was a lot of sense in that because they were communities. And yet most of them were known as they started out as consolidated school districts when they became consolidated, and some later on just became independent school districts. A little bit of trivia, Des Moines School District is still a Des Moines Independent School District. Why they haven't changed, who knows? Now that serves the city of Des Moines. Of course, there are lots of suburban school districts around it and growing very rapidly, Ankeny and Waukee and Southeast Polk and all those districts, but they remain the independent school district. But my sister, in 1944, graduated from that high school. She was 17 at the time, and she was 10 years older, so obviously I was 7 years of age. And she taught out there in a one-room school south of Buffalo Center, about 7 miles. And how she would get out there, she lived at home, and she took normal training in high school. And normal training was the teacher, kind of cadet teacher at the time, but it certified them as a one-room school teacher. They could go out and teach. And I didn't think about it at the time, but as I look back in retrospect and say, wow, what a challenge it was for a 17-year-old to go out. Some of our students were 14 years old. I was amazed when I went out there the first time because the bus would pick her up. It was a wood-sided school bus, just a relic. Remember, it was World War II. There weren't many things that were new or being built at the time. Everything was rationed. So if we did not have a day of school at Buffalo Center, they didn't call them professional development days at that time, as they do now, but that's what they were. I would hop on the bus with her when she left early in the morning, ride out, and then go to school with her that day. I was not a student in the school, but I was part of the school and just enjoyed immensely seeing what she was doing and how the students were interacting and all the things that went on in a one-room school. It was a rural area, agrarian, so obviously when schools were built in the townships of Iowa, as you know, Iowa is separated into kind of, because it's all rectangular, and there are 16 townships in each county, unless they're oddly shaped or sized. Now, Kossuth County right next door is the only county of 2 depths. I mean, it should have had 2 counties there. It would have been 100 counties, right? Yeah, would have been 100. Well, we've always been 99. Well, each of those counties, and my area was no exception. There was very fertile land, great agriculture. And every one of those, they were divided into sections. There was a road in about each section. And the farm, actually 640 acres in each of those square miles. And today you wouldn't think anything of a farmer farming not only that square mile, but the one next to it, and the one next to it, and the one next to it. But at that time, you could have a substantial income farming 80 acres. So divide the 640 into acres, and you would buy 80, and you would build a homestead, and you would do that throughout that square section of land of 640 acres. And you had large families, and why did they have large families? Because they needed help to do the work on the farms. And so it seemed like every mile you went, there was another school. And some survived, and so that was a great experience for me to see how she worked with those students. I was astounded because it was a 1st grade through 8th grade. And there were literally students of all ages, and I couldn't believe how we talk about the term of project-oriented teaching today, or even professional growth development for teachers, getting together and communicating. And teaching is often been stated as the most isolated job in the world. You go into a classroom and you say, okay, you're in charge. You do all these things. We'll be back here to help you, but no, you're on your own. And how she was able to get those students to work together and to really participate, it was kind of a small democracy, because they had to get along, and they had to really make decisions on what was going to happen, because they were all striving for what? Examination in 8th grade to enter into the high school. It was there were 9 through 12 high schools. And the County Board of Education had control over those tests. And those students had to work, and that was a primary objective, to get those kids to pass the exam. Now, not for everybody, because it was during the Second World War, and a lot of the able-bodied young men and some women were going on to war. I mean, they wouldn't even graduate high school. They would leave early. They would worry about getting their high school diploma coming back. So it was even more important that those youngsters in the family were helping with the farm duties. And so there were times that I would go out, and the older youngsters, especially the boys, were not in class. It would be harvest time, and they would miss weeks. And then, of course, the percentage of students who went on, because many of them stayed right on the farm after their 8th grade and just worked. And they became farmers themselves, and you couldn't blame them. I mean, that was their livelihood, and that's where it was. So I had that experience of visiting several times in her school. She then went on to Iowa State Teacher College at that time. And I'll never forget driving up, and we had a large family ourselves, and my brother was about 13 years old, and my father let him drive the car from Buffalo Center. He was bigger, and so the patrol didn't stop him or anything. And we drove up at Bartlett Hall and left my sister off for summer school. And the thrill of it was going down to the Black Hawk Cafe, where the Black Hawk Hotel is now, and having breakfast at that time, and then jumping in the car and riding back home all in one day. But she then went on to get her degree and became a teacher, for a long time. But it all started right in that one school, which was south of Buffalo Center at that time. So that was my first really experience of one of them schools.
Do you remember what the school looked like at all?
Yes, very, very similar to this. I must say, not nearly as nice as this has been maintained. There were, if I recall, it was just a lot of work to keep it going. And that was the duty of the teacher. Now, there were sometimes in the early, like long before my sister taught, maybe at the turn of the century, where they maybe added $1 to take care of the stove, maybe $5 for an entire year to maintain the building. So they had to get out there early and get the stove going and get the clinkers taken out from the night before. Clinkers were large ashes that would be there. And there was a lot of work with, of course, they had to get water carried in, buckets, and nearby farms. And of course, the outhouses, the privies, were boys and girls separated. And recess was a big time, and noon lunch break, of course, and so they were all on maybe about an acre of land, about an acre size of land, which to us is, when you build a home on an acre of land, that's something. So there was all this peripheral stuff that one doesn't think about, but had to be taken care of. And I can recall that there was a lot of rote memorization. A lot of, well, first of all, penmanship, which is a lost trait today. In fact, that was my worst subject. We had the penmanship classes, and I just couldn't make those sweeps that were there. And now, of course, with the advent of technology and the computers and everything else, it's a lost art. Many of them almost became experts in calligraphy. They were so good. Boys and girls, but not all of them were, including me. So the penmanship, which right there you go with the chalkboard, and those were in every class. Those were in my elementary classrooms growing up, and I tried to be that A. I couldn't even get beyond a good A, so it was there. So that was really my first experience with with the one-room school.
Just so we have it on record, your sister's name?
My sister's name was Wanda, and her name was Wanda Winter. She married, and her married name was Eckhart. And she passed just about, it was the end of 2016, and she was 89. And And we would, of course, obviously myself being in education, we talked a lot about it and talked about the old days and things like that. But she was very interested in, very active in her community and did a lot of work with historical work in her community and in community centers and libraries and things like that. So she was very, very active. I guess one of the things that really, I didn't think about it till later on, but there really was a feeling of education being important with those families who wanted it to be important. They knew, and that goes way back, and I can talk, I talked with my parents. Both of my parents were born in the 1890s. So my father was born in 1893, and his father was born in 1854, my grandfather, who lived with us, and I knew him well. He was 96 when he passed. German immigrants, northern Germany and Netherlands. It was peat ground, and it was off Friesland. There was East Friesland, Ostfriesland. There still are societies. They moved to, a lot of them moved to Illinois, came through Ellis Island, moved to Illinois, just to kind of a stopover. Homesteading was going on. There was land out west, Kansas, South Dakota, Iowa. And he brought his family. His 3 boys were born in Germany, and the 4th boy, my father, was born in Pekin, Illinois in 1893. They moved out to Iowa. Why? Because Iowa was a swamp. Literally a swamp. And they were used to that. They had dikes in northern Germany and in Netherlands, and it was peat ground. It was beautiful, beautiful dirt when it was dry. So now you can go through any kind of a rural area in Iowa and you see what they call drainage ditches or dredged ditches. And what they did was they simply drained the swamp. Now we heard about drain the swamp today in DC and so forth, but they literally drained the swamp. And you still have, especially in north central Iowa where I grew up, a lot of peat ground. You could almost say that was the Netherlands. it was fascinating because that's how they got started here. And then all these townships developed. But education was really in the back of their minds. We like to say now that education is an opportunity for a better life, and it is. We all understand that. But at that point, it was important to those people that their children get a start, then they get a good start. And so there was and this is in a book that Jim Kenyon just wrote, Golden Rule Days, of visiting every school in every county in Kansas and picking out one rural school that's been closed. And that came through in his book so often that the parents in the group, and a lot of them were ethnic groups. I mean, a lot of them were, the Swedes would settle here, and the Greeks would settle here, and the Germans over here, and so forth. And that continued for a long time. But they felt it was important to get a strong education. Iowa has long been known as a strong education state, a real leader in education, and justifiably so. Now we're at a point in this era here where we say we need more. Everybody needs more, but it's a truism, in my opinion, and so that we need to continue to fight that. These were what our forefathers came up with, and they were in almost uninhabitable conditions. I mean, the sod houses and things like that, those were realistic. And the work that they put into those farms to drain and then to turn and work on the soil and get it to be productive was really unbelievable. So, education was very, very important.
And then you followed your teaching career, correct?
Right.
Yeah. Where did you receive your secondary?
Actually, I graduated from Buffalo Center High School, the first consolidated school west of Mississippi, 1897. And I enrolled at Luther College in Decorah and went through the teacher education program and graduated in 1958. It was a great school, and it has improved since then. Just a delight, the school. I visit often, and they are doing great things. I think their incoming ACT freshman class average is about 26. And I won't tell you what the others are, but they really, They have a lot of students from Minnesota, Wisconsin. In fact, Minnesota may have the largest percentage of students at DeCourt because it's nestled up in the northeast part of the state. Decided to start a teaching career out in northwest Iowa of Lorenz. All right, it's in Pocahontas County. Began that in 1958, and that brings me to the Marshall Township Center School. That, if we want to get into that, we can do that. It's fascinating. So
Go ahead.
I started with that school in 58. I was all of 21 years of age. Our daughter was 2 weeks old, and she just retired from a teaching career and taught reading here at UNI, as well as Cedar Falls District. She was with North Cedar Elementary as a reading specialist. But she's now retired, and that's really something as well too, to think about your child is retired. So we started with that school district in Pocahontas County, and my connection with the schools was really very centered around that little community of Lorenz. It was a fine community, fine school district. But I want to talk a little bit about population in Iowa over the era of time, and I've done a lot of research on this. Iowa's population in 1900 is about what it is today, about 3 million people. Now that sounds strange, but there were all kinds of people in the state at that time. Now, a lot of them were out in these rural areas. I'm going to use Pocahontas County as an example, where I started teaching at Lorenz. In 1900, their peak population was over 15,000, the total county. There were communities like Pocahontas, Fonda, Havelock, Plover, Lorenz, a lot of small communities, but the population of the county was 15,000. 100 years later, in 2000, it was down to 8,000. So it went, just think of that drop. And the most recent census I looked at was 2010, it's down to about less than 7,000 now. So from 1900 to currently, it's dropped almost 60%, 55 to 60%. That's indicative. Now I have to say that Pocahontas County had the largest percentage drop of population of almost any county in Iowa. It was amazing. Great farmland, great soil, lots of families, big families, lots of one-room schools, and education was very important. But farming changed. And the communities, although they had some industry, it wasn't the type of industry that kept people there. Young people had to leave to get into other areas. The school I taught in Lorenz, the community was 1,800 people at the time, just short of 2,000. Now it's 1,100 people. The high school had probably about 200 students, grades 9 through 12. The numbers kept falling, as you can imagine, and eventually they merged with Marathon, which was in Buena Vista County, 7 miles to the west. Mm-hmm. And they also picked up some students from north of Albert City, which was also but south of Lorenz, and some students there. But even with Marathon, their enrollment continued to decline. And soon the writing was on the wall. And they are now part of Pocahontas Area Community School District. Pocahontas is the county seat town of about 2,000. And all those little communities which I referenced earlier are now part of that district, Pocahontas area. So those students, I'm going to step aside here a minute and give you a little bit of trivia that amongst all my trivia. Pocahontas is 15 miles, the city of Pocahontas, from Lorenz. And right smack in the middle, there was the town of Ware, W-A-R-E. It was incorporated, and it had a grain storage bin on a railroad track. And of course, if you look at maps of Iowa throughout history, and Kansas and South Dakota, railroads really defined where communities were going to spring up, because railroading was the big, big deal. Mm-hmm. And that town of Ware had a school. And of course, the joke about it was, where's Ware? It was W-A-R-E. They were still open by the time I started in 1958. And those students came from that school. They had it up through 8th grade, and they came into Lorenz. It no longer exists. But none of those schools exist anymore, and now they're all at the Pocahontas Area Community School District. Well, each of those sections of land, which I talked about earlier, 640 acres, the people had trustees, they had township trustees, and they also became the school environment for that area. They were in charge of that. This is one of them. The school we're sitting in right now is Marshall Township, called the Marshall Center School. 7 miles, oh, not 7, probably about 5.5 miles south of Lorenz. And it was built on an acre of land and was a typical one-room school. And I did not enter the school when I was teaching at Lorenz, but I had students whose parents went to that school. And it was always kind of an attractive school. Many of those schools became community centers. That's where the voting took place, that's where social kinds of gatherings took place. In fact, I contacted John Pullman, who was a student of mine in 1964, graduating from Lorenz High School. I just recently called him. He's just retired from his work as an implement dealer. And his parents lived on that farm, and he lived on that farm. He's still on that farm. And I said, John, I know that you live in Marshall Township. Can you tell me a little bit about the school? He said, can I tell you? He said, I am the clerk of the trustees, and I've got all the books of that school since it was started. In fact, even when it was sold to Vern Lundquist in 1985 for $350, the building and the acre of land. And it was the following year that President Dino Kuris of UNI said, we need a symbol of rural education. We need historically to connect this university, founded on education, preparing educators. And so I think they had 50 applicants that they went throughout the state, and people applied to be a part of it. And history has told us that Marshall Township was selected. John Pullman remembers the day that it was moved. And he recalled that they took the roof off because the power lines, there were lots of big power lines around at that time, and they had the roof off when they moved the school. And I think eventually it was, and of course that was 1987 when the building was moved here and the current site we're on. The person that sold the building to the University of Iowa, he didn't sell it, I have to retract that. He gave it to the University of Northern Iowa. And John Pullman said that he had to, as trustee chair, he had to maintain the building. They had to go in and clean the mice out before the voting. They had to do all sorts of stuff to get it presentable. But he said it was always in good shape, and it always has been in good shape. And that was one of the things, I think, that came about in the selection process, that they would select the school. And John said at this day, he said, I just drove by there yesterday. He lives a mile and a half from there. And he said, there's been nothing done to that acre of land ever. There's prairie grass on it right now. The building was moved and they let the grass grow. And they've never mowed it. They've never planted anything in there. And you and I with Daryl Smith, I don't know if you ever read about Daryl Smith. He is a prairie expert. He was a prof here. And if you ever hear of the fire burns that he gets out here and takes the kids out on prairie, the students I should say, out, and that's Daryl. Daryl has been out to Pocahontas County, and he has tremendous work on the prairies of Iowa. Mm-hmm. And earlier I said that there were swampland here, and there was, but there was a lot of prairie. And it kind of became about because there was moisture and the prairie would grow and things like that. And so there are people trying to preserve the prairies in the state, but that little acre of land where this building was on is still has prairie grass on it. And John called the Vern Lundquist, who is he donated the building. He's still living today as we speak. He's 99. And John called him and asked him if he knew of anybody who attended that school. And he said he couldn't recall anybody who attended that school. So the school was closed way back when, in 1944, I think were the last classes during the Second World War. Mm-hmm. So that's my connection with that school out in the beginning of my educational teaching career.
Mm-hmm. So, do you have anything you want to ask about?
Millions, but it's all off topic, so just keep going. I'm not going, my other meeting can wait. I'm not going anywhere.
So going back to the consolidation process,
Right.
from a teacher's perspective, what was that like? Describe that?
Okay, look at the structure, the organization of the school. There was a county board of education. And there was a county superintendent of schools. Mm-hmm. And it was necessary because, like Pocahontas County and like Winnebago County that I referenced earlier, you had all these one-room schools. There had to be some kind of connection. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't a school district, who could it be? Well, it would be the county superintendent of schools, who literally would go out to the buildings and work with people. I often kind of wondered how professional development took place, and I kind of know also because my sister really didn't have any. She took normal training in high school, and that was it. You're on your own. You go out and go ahead and teach those kids. But the connection was that they wanted to guarantee that there was at least some semblance of good education going on, that those students eventually had to take that 8th grade exam to move on to high school. It's really ironic, however, that I didn't have to take an 8th grade exam when I went through Buffalo Center Consolidated School District. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to take it because they thought that I was truly educated at that time, yet our rural school people had to take the exam. And it always puzzled me that my sister was always talking about student X and student Y having to take the exam, and sometimes had to go back the next year to take another year of one-room school to pass that exam. And that was a driving factor. So that was back to the organization. And county superintendents really stayed on for a long time until the period was about in the 1970s when reorganization took place because people were moving out and there wasn't a need for that kind of reorganizational structure. And area educational agencies were established. And I was really interesting, and I was administrator at the time. And some of them had names, some of them didn't, but they were mostly Area 1, Area 2, Area 3, Area 4. We in Cedar Falls in Blackhawk County were part of Area 7, which included Buchanan County, Bremer County, things like that. And so that became the superintendent of schools, and they were to be the conduit between the State Department of Education and local educational districts, and they were. The first office was located on Waterloo Road and 18th Street here in Cedar Falls, and then went through many transformations. Eventually, there was a lot of mergers occurring in the state, and this became Area 267. It's now called River, I don't even know what the exact term is now, I just know it as Area 267. And, but there's an official title to it. It takes the area from Mason City, Clear Lake, all the way over to probably Cresco and down in, and I think Marshalltown is included in it now. Formerly they had their own area agencies. Well, part of it was to deal with special education. They had their own special education staff. As principal of Cedar Falls, I started special education. Think about this, only in the 1970s. When I was principal of Cedar Falls High School, I had 100 faculty members for 1,500 students in grades 10 through 12. I only had one special education teacher, and that teacher was called, it was an MR teacher, and really we would say MD later on, mentally disability, students with mental disabilities. And then there was a push on to increase services for students with special needs. Now you can go to Cedar Falls High School, and that's the largest department in the school. The numbers are in the teens. There are teachers, or resource teachers, there are special needs area here and there and so forth. They all came about from the regional education agency. In fact, they were employed by the regional education agencies. And then finally, they got out of that business and they were part of the school district. So they're now part of the bargaining units of the school district. And yet it's a large, large department. So the question always comes up, how did those kids succeed prior to having all the assistance and help that they have right now? And the reality is a lot of them didn't succeed. and there weren't services to provide for them. And then of course you had separate facilities like River Hill School. River Hill Schools was part of the Area 7 Education Agency. Those were, that was a school designed for students with special needs, that there weren't the classes in the high school. Now there's been a lot of controversy, and a lot of that time from the 70s on with mainstreaming. Students would be mainstream. Earlier I talked about the Braille School, and there are no students at Benton, Iowa Braille School. They're all back in I should say all, they're mostly in the regular school district, community school districts, with services provided by traveling professionals who come in to work with them in that environment. River Hills remains open. It's interesting because that was one of the few schools that stayed open. It's mostly because parents thought such a great facility and their students were so well served there that it still functions today. And mostly they're students with profound disabilities, and the staff is unbelievable. And I'm giving you my opinions here now, and so it survived. Many regional agencies did away with their school of special needs, but that one still exists.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not private, that's actually...
That's public.
It's
That's
public.
education, you bet. Yeah, that's all funded by state, local, and state property taxes, and under the control of the legislature through the Iowa Department of Education.
Wow, okay. And when you said, I'm interjecting,
No,
I'm curious.
go ahead.
You only had one person per
Yes.
MC, you called it?
Right.
What percentage of your students do you think required that service at the time?
Oh, I would estimate that we probably had, I had 1,500 students. I would say that several hundred could have used some special services.
So it was a needed service then?
There was a needed service, it
Okay.
really was. It created a lot of, let's put it this way, as an administrator, I would have teachers come to me and say, okay, I've got student X, and I just don't think I'm meeting the needs of student X. Student X needs some special help, and I'm not able to do it. And it was realistic, and so you often wondered how student X was going to succeed. And now we've got mostly anecdotal evidence of students having that assistance and help and able to move on to the next level. I can think of students in colleges and universities who are there today because of the special education program. 50 years ago, there was never a thought of them going on to post-secondary education.
It was just high school done?
That's right, that's right. Now, 50-some years ago, we had the advent of community colleges in the state of Iowa. Hawkeye Community College, Hawkeye Institute of Technology, that was the official term, was started in 1965. And all of them were started at that time. Kirkwood of Cedar Rapids. It's interesting how Kirkwood then moved to become a full-bore, what I would say, providing services for all kinds of opportunities. They become almost a small liberal arts college. They became that. Where Hawkeye Institute of Technology remained true to its cause of Hawkeye Tech. That's what it's called, Hawkeye Tech. Well then, as things developed, Hawkeye became more involved with opportunities beyond just the technical services. Now you think about that, and we think about the tech surge in the recent decades. But think about that. In the 60s, they were calling that Hawkeye Institute of Technology. And so technology may have been a carpentry course. It may have been a welding course, electrical course, or whatever the case might be, and more power to them. And it was a great opportunity for kids to move on to post-secondary who didn't have that maybe desire to go to a four-year university or college or state school or whatever. So that's another factor that's changed dramatically in the state of Iowa in my lifetime. Mm-hmm. So I digress on that question.
Oh no, this is great. Let's see here. You know, let's go into your administration
Sure.
background a little bit here.
Yeah.
Describe the process of becoming an administrator. Like,
Right.
what were your personal experiences?
Great. I started my teaching career, and I was always interested in how it was organized, how the school was organized. Mm-hmm. And my first principal in charge of our school was Ruth Larson. This was back in the 50s. She was the principal. And I had a great deal of respect for her. Now think about it. We didn't really start a lot of female, I mean, there were a lot of female teachers. That was the dominant number. And yet here was Ruth Larson. She was a farm wife and terrific. She did, and I always admired how she was able to lead that school with the curriculum and with the activities and being a community connected person. I always admired what she did. And I thought, well, maybe I ought to think about administration. I loved organizing and I loved leading. I was a coach and I loved to coach young people. I loved the connections. I loved the organization. And I thought, wow, I could probably do this on a larger scale. But I was at Lorenz, and the closest university the college was Buena Vista at Storm Lake. It's now called a university, and they have a graduate program. Do you know about that?
I'm an alumni.
Right, okay. But they didn't have a graduate program. Okay, now they do. And so it was obvious that I needed to get back to somewhere close to a school that had administration certification. So Vinton had an opening for a classroom teacher and a coach, and I took it and I commuted summers and evenings and so forth to get my master's degree from at that time. When I enrolled, I got my degree from State College of Iowa. So we had several of us who had a carpool, and we'd get up early in the morning, we'd drive to Cedar Falls, and then I would get out in the afternoon to work. I had another job because I had a family, and I would study in the evening and then go back the next day. And then during the school year, I'd go back in the evening after teaching and coaching all day, and I'd come up for classes. And one of my favorite profs was Dr. Bill Dreyer, D-R-E-I-E-R. And Bill Dreyer was a rural school expert. You look in your archives and you're going to see things from Bill Dreyer. I was looking, after you called, I was looking up some things that kind of jogged my memory. And I looked up I just Googled in Buffalo Center School District consolidation, and it just popped up right there. Paper was written on the 100 years of the Buffalo Center School District, and the author was Bill Dreyer. And the current superintendent at that time in Buffalo Center. So they wrote this paper. It's in there. I mean, it's page after page, and it's what I grew up in. And Bill was the expert in that. He started his teaching career in Orange Township here in south of Waterloo. Now it was the old Orange Town. That was a separate high school. It was Orange Township High School. And they then went in with Waterloo. Now they have a new Orange Elementary building in that same area. It's south of Waterloo. It's just it's their newest building. And now they're developing land out there. Some controversy about they're building lots of apartments and things like that, and houses that people say, oh, we want to be out in the country. But it's that old urban sprawl, which you think about in major metropolitan areas, but has occurred here. But if people like Bill Dreyer, and there was another guy from Iowa State that he co-authored many articles. His name was Willis Goudy, Goudy. And if you want to research anything about rural schools and population trends, you always went to Will Goudy. And he and Bill Dreyer cooperated in many of those studies. And he was really the expert in school reorganization. And school reorganization was a topic. I mean, it was a hot topic. There were the old saying, when you lost your school, you lost your community. And that wasn't always true. I was principal of Vinton High School. I started in 1968. And we had a town about 7 miles west of Vinton called Garrison. And they had a school, and it was declining in enrollment. And it was a natural for their students to come to our high school. And one spring day, there was discussion about merging, and it happened. And I brought the number of kids over. I'll never forget, it was in May. I was first year principal, and there were 32 kids, students who came over and spent the day with us. And I had our students take them around the building, and they loved it. Their grandparents and parents didn't love it because Susie wasn't going to be first chair in the band. Johnny wasn't going to be a starting forward in basketball. No, some of them were, don't get me wrong there. But the kids saw it totally differently. Now, here's an interesting sub-fact with that. That name was never changed to Vinton Garrison. There never was concern that Garrison people wanted the name on there. You know, like there is Waverly Shell Rock. And all kinds of districts, and now they're all the alphabet districts of BCLUW, Beeman, Conrad, Liscum, Union, and Whitten. That's one school district that had a high school in Conrad and others around. And I never gave it a second thought as a principal. The kids didn't give it a second thought. And in fact, Jim Kenyon now is interviewing some graduates. Garrison is one of the towns that he's working in as far as his new book in Iowa, Rural School Closing. And it just happened, and they merged into the district just so smoothly, I couldn't believe it. All right, fast forward then. I'm in Cedar Falls at the time to the late 90s, early mid-90s. I'm still working. And I received a call from a newspaper, a young man I knew in school back at Vinton, and he was writing a story on Schellsburg. Schellsburg, they wanted to merge with Schellsburg, Vinton did. But Schellsburg wasn't going to move unless it changed the name to Vinton-Schellsburg, as it stands today. So then he had people from Garrison calling him and saying, why wasn't Garrison ever connected with that? And here we, and I'm telling him the truth. I said it never came up. There was never a discussion about the two boards met and they decided that they were going to merge, and that was it, and we never thought about it. But Schellsburg, they were very demanding that it be Vinton Schellsburg. Now, they weren't that much larger than Garrison, but somewhere or another it happened. But that's another topic that you could go into at great length with school reorganizations and mergers in the state of Iowa. It was really something.
The pride of a name and name recognition.
Yes, right. All the naming. And when I started at Lorenz, there were 900 high school districts in the state. 900. Now there are 320 or 330. So that's really changed over the years.
Wow. Gosh, I have so many questions. When you talk about...
And so back to administration.
Yeah, so...
And so I really decided, and then going to classes and so forth, I thought, wow, this is really something. And I became a principal in 1968. And little did I know, I taught history, and in the 60s, it was just fermenting. Everything was on the verge of coming apart. We had the assassination of Jack Kennedy in '63. Then we had the assassination in 1968 of Martin Luther King Jr. And a few months later, Bobby Kennedy. As an aside to that, one of my students at Lorenz was a basketball center for me, and a bright kid, and he went in the Air Force Academy and graduated in 1968. He invited me out to his graduation. So we went out. It was the night after Bobby Kennedy was shot in LA. And this is a military facility. And Hubert Humphrey was supposed to speak. And he was the Democratic candidate for president at that time. And they canceled his because it was security, laden. And of course they kept on their ceremony. They had the oldest planes flying over. It was on the stadium, the Air Force Stadium. Oldest planes first, and they ended up with the F-15s at that time. It was a great ceremony. But things were changing so rapidly that you hardly even knew what was happening. There was the anti-war sentiment. There was the anti-establishment. And people said, well, how did that affect Iowa? It impacted Iowa just like it impacted, not so much maybe the riots that occurred at the Democratic National Convention in '68 in Chicago, maybe the riots in Columbus, Ohio, LA, wherever the case might be. But there was a time of anti-establishment, anti-authoritarianism, and here I am, the principal, the new principal of a high school, and I was a teacher, and I loved the kids, I loved the students and the staff and everything, and yet just like that, I became a person in charge. And everything was impacted. Dress codes, hairstyles. We would send kids to the barbershop to get their hair cut before they came back to school. Nurse Nelson, if you walked in, you couldn't wear slacks or jeans or anything. You know, here these poor girls were out in the rural area at 20 below, and they couldn't wear jeans. Couldn't even, you know, they froze. And we said, why are we doing this? But everything was just kind of a challenge. And of course, we were located very close to the University of Iowa, and believe it or not, UNI. So our students who graduated went to those schools, and they would come home frequently, and they would put ideas in the minds of their brothers and sisters, and pretty soon, you know, it just impacted us, you know. And so it was just like that. It turned from you were in charge to everybody was in charge, and you had to navigate what was going on in that whole perspective, because you had people in the community said, by golly, you can't let them wear slacks, you can't let them wear, and the nurse would get the girls up on a chair with a measurement and say, your skirts are above your knees, they gotta go below the knees. And it was just like and if you wanted to institute a new policy or a rule, it was tough, because people were just gonna, you know, lash out. Part of it became from the anti-war, very big part in the 60s. I've read a lot of books, and I often wondered whatever happened to me when I was in that era. And I have a great book that I just thoroughly love. It's the 50s. It's a complete volume. I think the author was Schlesinger. Anyway, what happened in the 50s really caused what happened in the 60s. I never knew it that way. I was growing up in the 50s. And the 50s was post-World War II, and the economy was better, and everything was bigger. Cadillacs had fins a mile long, you know, at the back. I mean, you see some of those cars, how did we turn them around the block even, you know? Yeah, so it was just a kind of a period of excess, and bigger is better. And then along came the 60s with all the turmoil. And it was really because of what things happened. I digress again with that, but that was a terrific time in history, and I lived through it, I didn't even know it. So it's always fun to read and go back and say, well, this is what really happened, took place. But back to administration then, it turned into something very beneficial. There was just a move to a greater collaboration. And that was kind of the biggest word that I saw. And then moving to Cedar Falls with a much larger environment, and with a staff of 100 on my high school, you know, I had all these diverse areas and so forth, great staff. But to getting them together, and even departmental structure and things like that, how could we be more effective in what we were doing, and how could we make improvements? And it always had to be collectively. We had to do it together. It wasn't an edict handed down from the Board of Education by the superintendent, by the director of secondary education, or the principal. People had to be a part of it. And that's what's so exciting about education today. I mentioned earlier that I volunteered my work with the Cedar Falls Schools Foundation, and we generate resources for the district. And the greatest impact, people think of scholarships right away for students, but we've gone beyond that. We still give a lot of scholarships, but we are basically helping professional development, helping teachers with professional development in the district. And they have adopted what they call professional learning communities, PLCs, where it's really time set aside for teachers to get together, interdepartmental or elementary building, grade level kinds of things together. So they're working on issues, and their training goes in that. When they're going to conferences or have people coming and speak, they're talking about these collaborative efforts. And I think it's the most effective thing I've seen done in education in my actual involvement and my post-involvement indirectly over the last now pushing 7 years. So I'm really excited about what they're doing in the schools today. So if you're going into education and You're thinking about, as we're right across the street from Schindler Education Center, a teacher prep, in what are teachers to be going to face when they're out in the community. And I would say, my recommendation, I would say, just get the idea of working together. I had a former superintendent I worked for, had a sign on his desk. I worked for him for many, many years, and it was always this, I don't know, it was anonymous. All of us are smarter than one of us. And I always looked at that every meeting we had and I said, well, you know, there's truth to that. We may individually have the answer, but collectively we're gonna do it together. We're gonna be better for what's happening. So, so that was a real. I enjoyed administration. And people say, you enjoyed being a high school principal? I said, yeah, I enjoyed it. It was really, really something. And then as a central office administrator, I got to work with all the buildings and with the principals and with the teachers and so forth. So it became, I always felt I could do things on a bigger basis. I maybe wasn't the best classroom teacher, but I could help them, lead them to becoming a better teacher. And that's not a prideful thing for me to say. It's just that I thought that's the way it was going, and that's the way we should be going.
Mm-hmm. So in the 60s, you talked about this collaborative effort. Was that kind of the motto of you as an administrator to help these teachers kind of?
Yeah, without having the term even said at the time. Mm-hmm. You know, it just seemed to me that we had to have a lot more cooperation rather than because I would go in with teacher evaluation, performance evaluation, mm-hmm. visit every teacher in the classroom, and write up my performance remarks afterwards.
Those were your responsibilities?
Yes, right. I was evaluator of both the professional and quasi non-professional, mm-hmm. The support staff and things like that. So yeah, every spring of the year, it was a voluminous kind of set of tools that I had to use to do the evaluation. That was part of the requirement. And we even had a foray, my last year of professional teaching, Vinton went to a merit pay system, which has been talked about in dialogue ad infinitum. You can see studies in the library here that will, and so the board there said, we're going to pay 10%, we're going to pay an additional 10% of the base salary to a teacher who is rated in the excellent category. So there is a principle. First year was in place, I had to go and decide. My teaching colleagues, I had to say, who's going to get this, which was really something, because it was, if the base salary was $8,000, it was $800 extra for a year. Mm-hmm. But there were a lot of challenges with it, because who would decide and how would decide is a popularity contest. I even did a lengthy study on student evaluation of teachers. In fact, I did it with Bill Dreyer when I was taking his class. And I developed an assessment for teacher. They did it with every teacher in the building. I was teaching at the time, mm-hmm. and had students evaluate it all. I coded it all. I don't know how I did it without the technology of today. But I had and it was all unidentified. It was all anonymous. And so if a teacher wanted to see what the kids are saying about it, they could get it. But it was very interesting kind of thing. Probably the most interesting thing I've done. They did away with it, I think, after I left. And Cedar Falls had it in another format prior to my coming here. And it was very controversial here with the staff. And they dropped it. So.
What were some of the challenges that you faced as an administrator, the biggest challenges?
The biggest challenges, I think it was just here's the term, staying on top of everything and the changes that were occurring and being aware of the trends and being aware of the teaching learning process and what things were working and what things were not working. I always, administratively, when I evaluated any teacher, we had a full gamut of questions and things like that and guidelines to follow. But it's really very basic, and it was probably basic in my sister's one-room school class too, is that, first of all, what are you going to teach? In other words, what's the curriculum? And then the pedagogy, how are you going to teach it?
that's what you decided, what you're going to teach, how you're going to teach. And the third, maybe the most important, is how do you know if they learned it? The evaluation process. And there are different formats of that all the way through, but that's my thinking, that if you are in a classroom right now and I'm teaching you, first of all, what are we going to teach? How am I going to teach it? What style am I going to use? And then how do I evaluate you? How do I know if you really know it? And those are the three basics that I always kind of thought, wow, that's what really makes good classroom teachers, if they can do all three of those. A lot of technology from that point on. So that was always very difficult to be able to do that effectively. I always thought it was effective, but I suppose if you evaluated all the people I evaluated, they would have different ideas of it. I in turn, then when I became an administrator, I had to evaluate all the administrators. And that was a different format for them. I evaluated the principals, associate principals, and department chairs and things like that. So they did the classroom teachers, but I then had to evaluate the principals. And there were some challenges with that, because we had some really good administrators. Some did not pan out the way we wanted, and so then you move in the next direction and say, okay, what kind of improvement can we expect out of you? If we don't see it, then maybe it's another position someplace, or whatever the case might be. Didn't happen a lot, but it happened.
Okay.
And you could probably think of your administrators and your educational experience and say, okay, did I know this person? Did I do that? I always felt it was very important for me to be on a personal basis with as many as I could. I knew every student at Cedar Falls High School, the 1,500.
Wow.
I made it a point to know them. I wanted to be there. I went to everything that they did. I was at every activity, every musical concert, every play, every athletic event, if I could fit it in my schedule. And I also knew it was important when I walked down the hall that, Laura, I'm really concerned about what you're doing. As far as the teachers are saying this or that or so forth, and let's talk about it. And if Reggie Rottenegg would go by and I would say, hey Reggie, where are you going? Well, I thought I'd leave. No, you're not. You've got a classroom right here. So it was important, and I got to know about it positively, don't get me wrong. I mean, but to connect with them, it's interesting, my work with Cedar Falls School Foundation, what we do is annually, during Sturgis Falls weekend, you're both familiar with that, and that's when most of the classes have their reunion CF high classes, because it's a natural. They're coming home for the celebration, they're going to meet family, they're going to have a reunion, a lot of people are going to be there. So early on, I decided that, as a president, that we would host a Cedar Falls High School open house class reunion tour of Cedar Falls High. So I didn't have any idea what to expect, and the first year we did it, we had 700 people who showed up. And what I did was I brought them in, we registered because I wanted to have contact with them for the foundation. And then we brought them in groups of about 25 in the auditorium, and I gave them a brief background of what was welcome and a brief background of what was happening in the current school. And then I had students, high school students, current students, about 20 of them who were there, and then they'd take the groups around as tour. And they loved it. The grads loved it because they got to hear what the students had to say. And the students loved to hear the grads talk when they got on the third floor about the study hall at the end in the 1950s and what things they did, and things like that. So, but it's been a fantastic thing. Now, we did that for 5 years and thought, well, we won't do it again because it will be redundant with the classes. But we're still having many people who didn't get to do that who are now returning. So we're still doing it. I've got one plan for this summer again in June, the Saturday in June. And but one of the main reasons is to connect with them, to say, okay, would you like to give back to the school? And we've had terrific response especially from the age categories. They're having their 45th or their 50th class reunion. And the class of 1963, early on, were having their 45th, obviously in 2008, was it? Yeah, somewhere, yeah, that's right. And so a couple of them came to me, and in the community, I knew them, and they said, you know, we're going to have a reunion, and we're going to ask everybody to attend our class reunion activities, but we'd also like them to give $45, 45th class reunion, so that we can give to the foundation. Great, let's do it. So sure enough, it happened, and they had several who gave $45. They had several who gave $22.50. They had several who gave $450. They had one that gave $4,550. It was a start of something, and they were going to help that way. And now that's developed into one class trying to outdo the other. And the current class of 1970 will have their 50th next year. 3 years ago, they looked at what the 63 did, and they raised like $20,000. So the class of 70 said, we're going to raise $50,000 for our class, and they're almost there.
Oh.
So by the time they have it, it'll be 50. So the class of 71 says, well, maybe we can make 55. So the class of 70 came back and says, well, since it's the class of 70 and it's our 50th, why don't we make it 70,000? So those people are of the age that they're retired, and they're saying, okay, I'd like to do some philanthropic work, and what better place would it go to the school? It was discussed earlier about Cedar Falls High School wanting to build a new high school. And the district, it's my understanding now, and I think we're going to help it any way we can, they're going to have naming kinds of opportunities for people in the way of donations. They could name a section, or they could name a classroom, developing on a chart of how much they want to contribute. You can have, well, let's use an example. You could have the track named after you or your track youngster, and say, well, for $1 million you can do that. So, but anyway, that's been an interesting sidelight, and those people that come back. They are so fascinating. It's fun for me because I'll look out in the crowd, and when this class of 74 had their 40th, 3 young men were young, they're probably practically retired. They were sitting in the second row, and I said, Rex Pershing, Tom Strube, and Jim Messerly, you were sitting in that same seat when you were sophomores, when you were seniors, and I had you in there the first day of school, and they all three were stunned. They say, a couple of them have moved on, but they were stunned that they would even be recognized back at that reunion. Well, it's just fun to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Well, it seems the level of care and time you take really gains a lot of respect back from these students.
Yes, right. Yeah, their connections are just, and I always say this too, regardless of where I've been at, why wouldn't I want the best as a citizen in my community? Mm-hmm. And I think about it often. I go into my very people with professions in the community. My dentist was a student of mine, and in this school. My attorney, my medical doctor, the guy who delivers my UPS packages was a student in our community, and goes on and on. Why wouldn't we want the best for where we're going to live in the community? Why wouldn't we want the best for our grandchildren? And I've got great grandchildren. Why wouldn't we want the best for them? Because it's the future. It's always based on, I'm not going to be around, but I want the best for them. Because that's another generation or third generation down the line, and so it's very important. So that's my emotion, my passion about anything that I'm involved with, personally, because education is so important.
What lessons did you learn as your time as an administrator? What are your biggest takeaways?
That time I was an administrator?
Yeah.
I think the first time I had a farmer at Vinton, first year I was going to be a principal. And I had his students in classroom in school, and he was on the board of education, great guy. And his kids were super kids, and he was just a real good guy. And he came in the office, it was in the summer, I was gonna start that fall. You know, I already had my office, we were gonna open classes, I was gone home. And he said, I'm gonna give you some advice. He said, you're gonna find things that are gonna happen, and you wouldn't have any idea how it happened, why it happened, but you're gonna have to solve it. And I thought, that's great advice. The next day, the voc ed teacher came in with a problem for the kid, and he did something, and he just looked at me and he said, well, what do you want to do about it? In other words, to me, you know. So I think the day before, yeah, this guy called it right. I think that is probably the unknown, that you just think, you know, that something will come to you and you say, how in the world did that happen? And you know what, now I got to solve the problem. And that's administrative, what it is. It's been a big surprise, was a big surprise to me, and never ended. So there was always something that was going to come up, you know, that you didn't have any control on, and you had to solve it, maybe not to everybody's satisfaction. And so that's part of being an administrator.
Can I interject?
Go
I have
ahead.
a question.
Absolutely.
So, as an administrator, you've seen schools change, you've seen teachers change. So, in a school like this, we would have seen group learning with students and students working with students.
Yes.
And we hear rumors that that is starting to come back within the classroom. Your thoughts on that?
Well, that goes back to my earlier statements on collective getting together and doing group work. It's a great point. In the one-room school, you had student X over here was in supposedly 8th grade, and student Y over here was in 3rd grade, and well, they got together. And they said, you know, your reading is, you need to do something different here in the way you're looking at those words and comprehending and things like that. And I think, I'm going to give you an example of that kind of collective project work. I have 2 grandsons that went to Cedar Falls High School, and they both started working at John Deere right out of high school. They both went to UNI. And they worked at John Deere, and they learned a lot, and they went into, one went into management, business management, and the other one into operating systems. I can't give you the short term, but they're both in software development now. They both work for Deere full time. When they graduated from UNI, they had 401ks, you know, things like that. And I talk to them frequently about their jobs, and it's almost all group work. I mean, it's almost all group work. So it makes sense that if you're going to do group work, you're going to have some kind of background in it, and it's going to obviously take place in a classroom. And that's where the teacher becomes the facilitator with those kinds of opportunities. The youngest one is just finishing up his MBA at Iowa State, and it's all group work. Everything is, because that's his job. His job at Deere, he's in the headquarters building down at Moline. They don't have an office space. It's a beautiful building, and they'll have their computers and so forth, their laptops will be around, and there'll be 4 or 5 of them and say, okay, we're going to meet on this project right here, and it's probably right over by the cafeteria.
Okay.
And they're sitting down, and they're working together on it. And his master's is the same thing. He's going to graduate this spring, and of course the company, you know, provides for it. So that's not true in education. You know, you go out on your own and you take care of the expense yourself. But the company feels so strong, and it's a Fortune 500 company, and they say, if we're going to advance in the future and we're going to do things, we're going to do it together. It isn't going to be one person out here. You're going to have to get together and work it out. So that's an answer to your question. I think it's always been there, but I think it's more important today than ever before.
Good answer to that.
Yeah.
I love that. The other side of that is discipline throughout
Yes.
the years as an administrator.
Yes, right.
How have you seen that change from, say, when you were visiting your sister's school
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
when you retired?
Right. There was always that early times, by early era, discipline was very important. was discipline when I was going to school. It was the old adage, you know, you get to trouble in school, you're going to have the paddle at home and things like that. My very first year of teaching at Lorenz in 1958, a great superintendent by the name of Joe Holterman. He was a retired colonel in the Second World War, and the military was his modus operandi. And it was probably the second week in school, and I was walking down the hall, and he says, "Winter, come here." I want you down there. We went down to the locker room, and two of the older students in school had done something that did not meet standards, his standards, in the classroom. So he said, "I want you to be a witness." So he had the paddle, and he took the guys out of the locker room, he had them drop their drawers, and paddled them each about 10 times. And the one kid was a great big kid, and tears started coming down to his eyes, and I said to myself, what the heck am I doing here? But I walked away from that and thinking, well, but that was discipline back at that time. That was the, you know, that was a militaristic way. And did it work? Yeah, those kids were not a problem after that. But you know, it wasn't too much longer that was forbidden. You could not do it at all. You wouldn't touch somebody. And I'm reading a book right now on, it's called Tigerland. It's East Columbus, Ohio in 1968, when everything is breaking loose. It's a black school, and a black principal and a few in Columbus, Ohio. And it's great to read because it's that change that I talked about earlier, where discipline changed, and where in his school, where he had to work with afros, which were coming out on movies. The Mod Squad on TV was, you know, and kids were all growing afros in his school, and parents were upset. What's this change going on? He had to deal with all that. He had to deal with music changes. And that's why it's such a fascinating book for me, Tigerland, and it goes about throughout his school year and all the things that happened in that year. 68 was such a pivotal year in this country. And it was a pivotal year in education. It was a pivotal year in discipline in education. Slowly, things changed. But it was really, from being an administrator, I probably was more cognizant than anyone else, because I was supposed to carry out the discipline. And yet, there were things that changing.
So you knew it worked, but you also knew where things were going, so
Exactly.
you had to blend the two.
Exactly. You had to blend, and you had to say, okay, I know things are happening and changes are occurring. How best can I work this out? What's the reasonable approach to this? It didn't happen overnight, but we moved in that direction, and I think things were better for it. Okay. I think they were. Rather than the feared discipline that people would say, well, you got to have discipline. You know, that's what we had. We had discipline in school in Marshall Township School here. We had it. So yeah, that's been a big change.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I took over.
Oh, no, you're
Go
good.
ahead.
Just out of curiosity here, are you comfortable talking about how much you earned as a
Sure.
administrator?
I'm
Yeah,
very
what were
comfortable
salaries
with that.
like?
I'm very comfortable with that. In fact, reading this book, they had the salaries in there in 1968, you know, and my first job out of Luther College in 1958, I went out in the spring of the year to settle the contract, and it was for $3,800, $3,800. Mm-hmm. And then there was an additional $200 for coaching football, basketball, track, and being chairman. I didn't have any idea what chairman was about. I didn't care. All I know is that I got $200 to put me at $4,000, and I thought, this is heavenly. I'm rich, which I was not. And my first rent payment took care of that, you know, my first rent. But it was not very much. And yet we got by, and it gradually increased. And when I went to, I think I moved to Vinton, I think it was maybe $6,000 there, about 6 years later. And then when I went to administration, I remember it exactly. My first year at job as principal was $12,000 in 1968. I retired as an administrator at Cedar Falls Community Schools as director of secondary education. My top salary was $89,000. I just read in the paper yesterday where they hired a new associate principal at Cedar Falls High for $89,000. So this is 20 years. I retired in 1999. So collectively, my job, and I know the person in my job, and they're public records, so there's no new about it. I think his current salary is $143,000, which take inflation from 1999 to 2019. It's there. The beginning teacher rate has really been a problem. I think that continues to be a problem as people look at careers and they say, what are my prospects? And if they're looking at, some districts are still offering $35,000. And it's a poverty level. I hate to say it that way, but it's not enough. And if we're going to attract quality people to that, we're going to have to look at that structure, and there's going to be more enticing. There are other things that are certainly important in your choice of career. I just had a great sense of gratification in being a career educator. I just loved it. And experiences which I wouldn't trade for anything. Probably could have made a lot more money someplace else, but that wasn't the important part of it. It was making a difference, thought it was. And in retrospect, I looked at that it was worth it. And so I kind of moved ahead to your question there, but what I made was it progressed. It was almost kind of a lockstep thing statewide, because District X would talk with District A and say, okay, what's your bargaining offer going to be this year? And I was at the bargaining table as an administrator, and so we bargained with our union groups, and there'd be late night hours and things like that. And these were my colleagues, these were my people I work with and so forth. But we had X number of dollars to work with, and you went to bargaining in good faith. That all occurred in the 1970s when Iowa got into collective bargaining. Now that means just like bargaining on a John Deere union shop. Now the legislature 2 years ago did away with collective bargaining, which was unbelievable to me, a person who worked in collective bargaining. And I really thought it was the be-all and end-all, because it gave an opportunity for both sides to sit down and talk about meaningful things. And all of a sudden, legislatively, they said, we're going to do away with it. And so there are some things that are just puzzling to me, how in today's current political environment, there seems to be maybe a force that's saying, we think you're getting too much, and you got the other side of saying, we need more. And if public education is going to continue to be the kinds of things that happened here at Marshall Township School 100 and some years ago, are we going to continue to have this battle? And it's a struggle. And they've been forced, districts have been forced to look at very small increases. University of Iowa, Northern Iowa has been forced to look at in the region schools. It's a struggle, it's tough. And tuition keeps increasing. It's really hard, it's really difficult for people to project out and say, wow, is this going to continue to grow? And are we going to cut out a class of people that are really going to have and won't have the opportunity to go to Buena Vista or to go to Luther or to go to UNI, University of Iowa? There are really some concerns that our future is looking. You are what, a senior, Laura? Or a junior?
I'm a graduate student.
You're a graduate student, right? You're a graduate student. So you've been through that, and you've seen tuition increase.
Oh, yeah.
And you say, okay, how much is enough? And obviously in graduate school, you love to learn. I mean, I take that as something that I see like people wouldn't go on if they didn't love to learn, and that's what it is. I'm in my 80s, and I read, love it, trying to keep up with things going on and seeing the changes that are occurring. It's fascinating.
But with you listing your salaries over the years, just goes to show that teacher pay has remained dismal
Yeah, right,
throughout.
right,
Yeah.
right. It just, and those are big factors. And I guess politically, that's the way we're a democracy, and if you're going to see some changes, you're going to have to be, I'm not making a bipartisan statement here. I'm just saying politically, all the forces at play, decisions are made that you don't have any control over.
Right. Well, to wrap up
I
here.
have one last question
Oh,
before you
no,
wrap up.
yeah, go for it.
It's a big one.
All right.
All right.
So in the end, going through all these different generations, do you think in the end consolidation was a good thing or a bad thing or somewhere in the middle?
I think it was the only thing.
The only.
I think it was the only thing. And the reason I answer it that way is, how can I put it? To me, education, public education is all about the opportunities to have success. Not that you're going to have success, but you first of all have to have the opportunities. As a rule, larger districts can provide more of those opportunities than smaller districts. I'm not saying anything against a small school environment, not at all. But as kids develop and grow and mature, they need to have opportunities for diverse experiences. And I'm talking about curriculum here. I'm talking about opportunities to participate, to do the kinds of learning things that we talked about earlier in the discussion. So I think almost without doubt, and I've gone through consolidations and I've gone through reorganizations, and I think that, and here again I'm anecdotal, and it's my opinion, but they're just, I've had kids tell me that. I had students from Garrison say, wow, I really enjoyed my high school, but now I've got so many different courses that I can enroll in, or I can do this and I can do that. So it's really something. I often think of my first year as principal, and I had a student body, I had a student government, and my student body president was Sally Peterson. Sally Peterson ended up becoming lieutenant governor of the state of Iowa with Tom Vilsack. My secretary was Marcia Turnus, who came from a large farm family, first one to go to college. She told me later on that our counselor told her that, when she was talking about careers, that she should be a nurse. She went to the University of Iowa and graduated in political science, became a Supreme Court justice. And by the way, she was in when they had the controversial vote. She was the first woman, the second woman Supreme Court justice, and the first, she had another first, but anyway, they got in the marriage question, and they ousted two of them, and Marcia was one. Terrifically bright person. And we often talk about it. I was so glad that she went beyond what someone, they kind of said, and nothing wrong with nursing, I'm not putting that down at all. But she had a lot of ability. And the third one was my treasurer, it was Charles Beatty. Chuck Beatty ended up being the head of eye, ears, nose, and throat at Rochester Mayo Clinic. He's internationally known. These are my three student body government officers in the class of 69, because it was 68, 69. And I'm thinking, we used to meet together, and I still have contact with all of them. Chuck Beatty emails me all the time, and he was honored he went to Luther, and I encouraged him to go to Luther College, and it's a great pre-professional school, and he ended up, and they honored him as a distinguished service. He said, I know you can't come up to it, but he said, I'm going to mention you in my speech. And when you look back and say, holy cow, did I make a difference? Did I do something to have this kind of, and Sally Peterson stopped in to see me when she was on her tour, and out as lieutenant governor in the state, and Marcia as well too. So I just use those as an example that there you see that somebody paid attention, they had a solid education, they had solid opportunities, and they moved forward with them.
Thank you. That's, wow.
Wow. Well, goodness gracious. I know you have to leave soon.
I do. I've
Yeah.
got to go on to my next big thing.
Right. So, Floyd, is there anything else that we didn't get to that you want to mention
Oh,
about rural education or administration?
I'm full of facts about one-room schools and about reorganization. And, oh, here's another one I got to tell you about. Probably not on the record thing, but I told you earlier I play at noon at the UNI MBA. And first of the semester, we always get a new batch of students because they can come in and play. And we've got community people and we've got profs and so forth. And students, they show up, and the first thing I ask them is their name, and they tell me. And I said, Jacob, where did you go to school? You've never heard of it, they always tell me. They're 97% Iowans, as you know, on the UNI, at least undergraduate level. And I said, trust me, I have heard of it. And I have not only heard of it, I've been there. And they kind of put their head down. And I said, even if you're in alphabet school, I can give you the names of those towns in the alphabet. Inevitably, they'll say, well, I'm from Grettinger. I said, yeah, you're right up by Emmitsburg, and I know people in Grettinger, and you're up by Terrell and Ruthven, you know, and so so it's been really fun to do that. And you know, there's kind of a self-effacing attitude on their part. And my purpose for asking it is, that's great that you're doing that and you had a background and now you're going forward. Don't forget what you had there. They kind of put their head down and say, well, I'm from Grettinger, you know, and everything. Okay. But they've been doing some merging. They have more things that they've been offered, and those schools that got together with the alphabet school name, they're having more opportunities. It goes back to that. So it's fun, and I think there's that old saw about Midwest values and things like that, and it's fun to see that. They're good kids. I know things are changing, and I know things that they're going to face will be totally different than what we faced and everything. But there's that hope, and there's that that kind of the young people have. That's fun for me to be part of that. I serve on a lot of boards, and one of the best boards I serve on is a volunteer center, Cedar Valley. We have a UNI graduate who's our director. And the point I'm making is the board is all young people. Of course, everybody's younger than I am, obviously. But they're in their early 20s, 30s, and 40s, and they are so terrific. It's so fun to be part of them because they get what it is. They get what the mission of the organization is. And they're willing to go out and do things for it, get their hands dirty. And it's just fascinating. And I often tell my other boards I serve on that, God, if maybe we need some youth in here to get us back going here and things like that. You know, we're staid and old, all this. So to me, it's fun to be a part of. It's fun to me to be on this campus every day.
May I ask what these are here?
Yeah, these are maps that I made off the computer. I got up to the Iowa Department of Transportation, and this one is Pocahontas County, and this is this is Lorenz up here, and here's the Marshall Township School, and this is Winnebago County, and this is my little hometown up here, and the school is right down here, the one room where my sister taught. I think that's up there. No, right here is my school up here. Yeah. This is my wife's hometown, Rake, R-A-K-E. And that's Marshall Township right there. That's where this school was at. And so I did some work with percentages and population and things like that. But it's so if you like structure, you say, okay, here are the 16 townships, and then each square mile, and think about that with a school being at each one of those little blocks.
And then there's like 300 left in the state out of all of that.
Out of all the 1,000 communities in the state of Iowa, there are only 300 left.